Today I want to explore some possible reasons why Gen Z is so messed up. And I'm going to speak a lot from my personal experience, and I think some of you will be able to relate to this. And the reason I thought of this is I was recently talking with my wife about my childhood and her childhood. Even though we both grew up in the 2000s and 2010s, we had a radically different experience on some fundamental things, mainly because I was raised in a secular household with very little structure. And because of the internet, I was exposed to a lot of things I wish I wasn't exposed to. And even in her conservative Christian Protestant household, that obviously wasn't perfect, she was protected from a lot of that and didn't get exposed to a lot of the things that I think a lot of secular households and the households that just kind of like lack structure. Both parents are working, they're busy, and the kids, they're on their iPod and they get exposed to a lot of things. And I think this can partially explain why Gen Z is so radical and divided and polarized and lost in a lot of ways. Or then in American history and in most societies, you're handed down a tradition, from your parents, and you only have what's around you. But now in the age of the internet, you can literally be exposed to anything at a very young age. I had a normal childhood, and I'm really grateful to my parents that they, provided financial stability. I grew up watching, cartoons. I mean, some of those cartoons were pretty weird, like Flapjack and Courage the Cowardly Dog, and even SpongeBob. In a lot of ways, SpongeBob represents Gen Z, where SpongeBob couldn't afford his own house, so he had to plant a pineapple seed and grow his own house. He's working in a job that is kind of dead end. He's working at the Krusty Krab. He can't even make enough money, and he's kind of a adult child. He doesn't have his driver's license. He acts very childish, yet he's an adult. In a lot of ways, SpongeBob is the icon of Gen Z. It's innocence to Gen Z. Gen Z care about truth. Everyone cares about truth, and everyone cares about being genuine. And I think people innately have a lot of love in them. But people get so black-pilled and burnt by the world that they become very nihilistic. They become very ironic. I think the underlying problem with irony and sarcasm and all of this is that it's very passive, and people don't say how they actually feel, because I think in Gen Z we weren't taught that, like how to actually be assertive. Everything that we see, since we're raised by the TV, we're raised by YouTube, doesn't show you actually how to be virtuous in your communication, how to be assertive. It shows people how to be passive. All we see is dysfunction on TV and YouTube, and it just continually plays that. It's like a never-ending cycle of dysfunction. That's what Gen Z was raised on, is seeing in these cartoons, seeing in these YouTube videos, seeing in these movies, just constant dysfunction. And then when you become an adult and you can watch the adult movies, there's even more dysfunction in that. There's even more depravity. There's not a good example of how an adult should act, of what's the goal of life. Is we don't see that in TV. And some people will say, well, why are you getting your values from TV? Because that's the society we live in. Both parents are working. Most of them aren't very religious. My parents weren't very religious. They didn't teach me, very solid principles. And I think this is very common. And so where do we get our principles from? Is the babysitter is the TV. The babysitter is YouTube. And, I would say I didn't get exposed to anything too bad in elementary school. But then once I got to middle school and I got my iPod Touch, that was basically Pandora's box. As a young middle schooler, I could see whatever I wanted. You could watch whatever movies. I remember jailbreaking my iPod and getting free movies. And as soon as I turned around that age where it's like, oh, you're 13, 14, you can watch adult stuff now just because that's what the TV ratings say. But that's not actually true. Just because a 14-year-old can watch it doesn't mean that's what they should watch. And so, this lack of oversight from my parents, they tried different things, restrict, make sure I wasn't getting into bad things. But ultimately, I think as a parent, if you want your kid to not get into bad things, you need to be super involved in their life and keep them busy, not just have a internet restriction where it bans certain websites. There's lots of, family events. You're doing stuff together as a family, and there's no time to get into all this stuff. As a young, boy in middle school, saw that there was, the rated R stuff, the adult stuff, and I'm technically old enough to watch it, so I can watch it. And so I watched all these comedy movies because that seemed like the cool thing to do, to watch these adult comedy movies with my friends. And I had no idea the references or anything, like Harold and Kumar, Hangover, adult movies, Pineapple Express, Superbad. These movies have terrible values, absolutely terrible values. It's everything wrong with society. It's hyper-sexualized, it's hyper-materialistic, it's hyper-depraved. The humor, a lot of these are super bloody, they've got a lot of, sexual themes, foul language. It is the exact opposite of virtue. But it was like, as a middle schooler, it's like, ooh, I'm old enough to watch this, and this is what the adults watch, so I watched that. Same thing with Family Guy and American Dad. As soon as I was old enough, I watched every episode of Family Guy, every episode of American Dad. These were basically the values that I was, subconsciously taught, is that this is how it works. When we are watching something, we are given a message. We are given a subliminal message. That is the reality of TV and movies. You can say that, oh, it doesn't affect me, but it does. It does affect you. I'm watching horror movies too, because it's like, oh, I'm old enough, and like, this is scary. This is what adults do. Horror movies are totally depraved. They're totally depraved, and they have all these bad themes. And then on YouTube at that time, who was popular? People like Shane Dawson, people like Ray William Johnson. And I think it makes sense because this is largely kind of the ethos at the time, is like live and let live. I would say the early 2010s was very kind of libertarian on the right and left, and this was very present in the culture. And I remember specifically getting into people like The Amazing Atheist, and anti-feminist content was very huge on YouTube at the time. And Amazing Atheist, I thought he was so great, even though he's not teaching good value. He's not talking in a virtuous way. And I was a proud atheist. Even though I was very secular, I became a proud atheist because I was watching people like The Amazing Atheist. And I'm saying that basically this was what I think a lot of us was basically just, we were raised on, is we had no guidance. It was a libertarian upbringing. It was a laissez-faire upbringing. You could get into whatever you want because, 13, 14, you can make your own decisions. But watching these movies, watching these YouTube things, it's really hard for a young person to discern what's actually, good and bad values. Especially when you're not getting that in the home, you're trying to basically create this own structure. Now, thank God, I think that eventually, this anti-feminist content on YouTube eventually kind of gave birth to a lot of the right-wing movements that we see on YouTube now. The right wing has gotten a lot more consistent, and I think it's helped people, that it's basically a pipeline, maybe starting there, seen over the years that it's evolved into what does it mean to be, anti-feminist? Like, what are we really getting at here? Is that it's getting at truth, like right wing is about self-improvement, and eventually God is like ultimately to be rooted in truth, to be rooted in goodness is to come to God. And I'll talk about that later in the video. With the YouTube and the movies and TV is that the libertarian ethos also talks about, like weed and drugs, and that it's good, and it's actually medicinal and it's good. And like, how do people have all these backwards beliefs that we can't do this? Like we're rational. Like people, if you legalize all drugs, society would be better. This is the ethos on the right and left at the time. And I think this was also very prevalent in sexual ethics. It's like I'm seeing all this hyper-sexualized content on YouTube and movies, and then pornography was very, very prevalent. Is like eventually, one of your friends at school tells you about it. That's what happened for me, is that one of my friends told me about it, and so I start watching it. They tell me what they're doing, and then eventually you're addicted to this. And so this sets a trajectory for destroying your brain and destroying your soul ultimately. Is I was a slave, and I had no guidance. I had no idea where I was going. It's just the only thing I knew is, don't do too bad in school. Like get like A's and B's, maybe like 1C, and that's it. So you can get a job and do what? Just live your life so you can do the same exact thing. I mean, there was no structure given. And I really think that a lot of people grew up with this, and being exposed to all of this, being exposed to the internet, and at that time, and still to this day, is very, very not a safe place for a kid. Is you can see the most evil, grotesque things that before a kid would never even imagine. But now they're being exposed to it constantly. And like finding out on like Reddit called Watch People Die, where it would show lively videos of people dying. And basically what I'm saying is that everything that seemed adult was depraved and awful and teaching terrible values. And this is what you're attracted to as a kid. It's like, oh, this is what the adults are doing. And getting into all of this and doing that from middle school to high school is being addicted to, pornography, because it's normal. Like, look at the movies. Everyone's just hooking up. This is just how it goes. YouTube, the movies, TV, everything in my life, there was no structure, and you're just living in a hyper reality, really. And I think it's even worse now, like this generation has TikTok. Seeing all of this, it makes sense that Gen Z is going to be pretty messed up. That Gen Z is going to have a depraved sort of humor that doesn't make any sense. Postmodern sense of humor. That's really what it is with irony and sarcasm and all these Gen Z memes, is that they don't make any sense. And that's what's funny. It affects us. I think it really is traumatic for a child, and that's why when I have kids, I want to give them structure, not in an authoritarian way, not in a controlling way, but in a way that there's guardrails for their life. Like even in my wife's upbringing, even though it wasn't perfect, but just to have I think anyone who's raised just basic Protestant American conservative Christian, a lot of them are grateful because it gives them some guidelines for their life. And of course, there are the Gen Z and millennial people that have religious trauma. And a lot of them that can create militant atheists. But I think on a societal level, that just even the people who had the basic American conservative Christian upbringing, it gives them just some structure on their life. And some parents that, hey, we're going to make sure we're doing more family stuff. Hey, we're going to make sure we're actually instilling some good values and virtues in our children. Versus the reality, I think, for secular parenting is that the society determines what your kids are taught, what they see, their peers, what they're taught in school. The government teaches them. And the government doesn't teach really any good values. Very common of the parents of Gen Z is that they just gave their kid an iPod Touch or a smartphone. They gave them online video games. They got them the Xbox 360. But what ends up happening, especially with online video games, is that ends up being where they spend a lot of their time. That's what happened with me, because that's what all my friends were doing. We were doing the same thing, where we're all hopping on and playing Modern Warfare 2 and then Black Ops, Grand Theft Auto, and all of these different games. And then you get into PC gaming where you play CSGO and Overwatch and Rust and GTA 5, all these very, very competitive games. And there's a whole debate of like if video games cause people to be violent. Regardless of that, I think that being in these spaces where they're like hyper competitive, like all of us have been in the Modern Warfare 2 lobby. I mean, guys just say stuff, they scream stuff. It's very competitive. It's very toxic. It's honestly very toxic, and it's rewarding the wrong thing. And this is where a lot of put thousands of hours into these video games. I did, and I have nothing to show for it. It's a hedonic treadmill where you get this pleasure, but then you want more, so you play more, and then you just spend more and more time, because that's really the only thing that can kind of give you a break from the world, and that's not healthy. It's just not a healthy environment. The gamer environment honestly isn't healthy for a lot of these online competitive games. But I think what happened a lot with Gen Z men is they just spent so much of their time playing online video games, and these are not good environments to develop social skills. It's the exact opposite, is that's why so many Gen Z men act so autistically. Not because they are autistic, but because they're just, that's what they're used to, just being around a bunch of other guys saying things uncensored and not having any restraint or being thoughtful in what they're saying. And they're in this environment where it's like a cutthroat competitive game like CSGO. It's just not the best for a developing young person. And now in high school, I think it got, really bad for me, because again, everything for me, the values are coming from others, peer pressure. I don't have any internal principles. And I think it's kind of crazy to think that a high schooler is going to develop their own ethical life system and principles by that age. No. It's a responsibility of the parents and society to pass down a tradition that is good. In high school, what I see is people are getting into, alcohol, drugs, partying, and this is just normal. This is what even the smart kids are doing. The smart kids, their parents are divorced, so might as well just go over to his friend's house. The one parent's gone, so you have the house all to yourself, and they would get into drugs. And a lot of these would, start with maybe just like alcohol and weed, but then it always gets more and more. That is what I saw. I truly believe weed is a gateway drug because I have seen it myself. And even if it wasn't a gateway drug, marijuana, I have seen how it affects people in their life. Is that it really it sucks all the motivation out of people of just doing it every day, just smoking every day. It's like, oh, we got to smoke before everything. And if you hang out around that, it's hard to not engage in it. So that's why your friends really matter. Or if your friends are just smoking all the time, you're probably going to do that. When you are young, this greatly affects your brain. And I knew this. I was in the classes. They say, this affects your brain. It has irreversible effects. I didn't listen, especially with something like nicotine. Vaping was getting really popular. I never planned to vape or smoke a cigarette, but when my friends got a vape with no nicotine, it has good flavors, and so he let me try it. I'm like, wow, this is fun. This tastes good, even though you're literally breathing in toxic chemicals. And they have nicotine in it, and I try that. I'm like, wow. And then I keep doing it, and I realize I'm addicted to nicotine. And I'm realizing I'm so irritable. And I think this still affects me to this day, because these drugs, when your brain is developing, are super bad for you. And again, even just a basic Christian conservative parenting, even if it's Protestant, can protect this. Like family values, this is really important. Thank God that I was able to stop vaping, because eventually you just get used to it. And I even tried, cigarettes, and it's like your throat's already used to the burning, so it doesn't even make big of a difference. And vaping during school, and one of my favorite teachers caught me, and that caused me to go cold turkey, and thank God that I did. I probably have really bad damage to my lungs and brain because of the nicotine. And then marijuana, I honestly had a blessing happen to me, a lot of my friends did smoke, and that was what they did at hangouts. But thank God what happened to me is someone made an at-home edible, and I already smoked, and then I ate that, and I ate a lot of it, and I had my first panic attack. And that is scary. I literally thought I was dying. I could feel my heart, and it felt like it was exploding. It felt like my heart was exploding, and I was dying right there. And that was I think anyone who's had a panic attack will know about that. And this is the scary thing about drugs and why you should not do drugs and you should be sober, is because you are not in control, and it can have irreversible effects on you. And it changes who you are as a person. So thank God I had that panic attack, because anytime I tried to smoke after, I would have panicky feelings. And it made me think about life and death more, which I think eventually sent me on a path to God. But thank God that I quit nicotine, that I quit weed. And I was way too scared to engage in, some of my friends were doing mushrooms and acid and these things, and LSD and Molly. These things were really scary. Xanax. Do not do these. Especially these things can be laced with things that can kill you, like fentanyl. I was on such a edge, and just the fact that I just thought this was normal. This is what kids I went to a good high school, and this is what the smart kids are doing too. It's like they're doing better in school than me, and they're doing this. They're partying. And then the music, the ghetto music, the ghetto rap music that glorify everything bad in society, promiscuous sex, hooking up, violence, the values. I mean, it's basically like the show Euphoria. That's what Gen Z, it's like that's just normal. And it's like, this isn't normal. This is depraved. This is bad. And we shouldn't normalize this. Like literally unhealthy communication, unhealthy habits. It's so bad. And this is the norm, I think. I think everyone's upbringing is going to be different, but I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to this. Is that Basically, when things are on autopilot in American society, which a lot of Gen Z kids were raised, you're going to get chaos. You're going to get dysfunction because that's what the society shows. That's what the society is handing down, is dysfunction. Everything in the society is dysfunctional. And there's literally no purpose to it. It's like, why not do the drugs? Because you're just a hedonist. You're just hedonism. What's the point of anything? It's just like, that's really the end conclusion, is this very nihilistic worldview. And I see Gen Z trying to nihilism seem cool. It's like, life is meaningless. Oh no, I'm sad. No, it's like, no, I'm actually happy. It's great. That is the biggest cope. That is the biggest cope. And I think this is why Gen Z has all these very unhealthy coping mechanisms, because they're very depressed. They're very repressed. They want liberation. And that's why a lot of them are to leftism. Leftism gives them some sense of virtue, that we need to improve society. That leftism is ultimately empty because it is a godless system. Versus when you go on the right wing, ultimately right wing politics should lead you to truth and Christianity. And we're just seeing that in the culture. When you work out, what are you doing? You're going and denying yourself. That's a Christian thing to do. Not doing drugs. That's a Christian thing to do. Is we shouldn't do that. And something like alcohol in Christianity, we don't ban alcohol. It's not that alcohol is bad. It's how we use this. Like Jesus himself, drank wine. And so it's all about the proper use of things. And then in Christianity, the family values. That instead of having promiscuous sex and these unfulfilling relationships, you should love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, that's a huge task to do. And I think a lot of Gen Z is very, very passive-aggressive. I know I was very passive-aggressive. I was repressed, and I'm still working on it. I'm still recovering from it, of being a good communicator. And speaking in love I think Gen Z, even on the right and left, is very, very bitter. They are bitter about society. They feel that society is unfair. And there is some truth to that, because the world is kind of a lie. But what does that mean? Do you actually have a paradigm that can make sense of all of this? I think Christianity is that. Christianity is what Gen Z needs. They need the structure in their life. They need God. We need God. We need a model. We need a model that we can live after, that live by, like Jesus. In Orthodoxy, not only do we have Jesus, but we have all the saints who are mimicking Christ. We are all called to participate in Christ. Your life has meaning. You have a cross, a heavy cross. Why when people get in college and, you suffer more, you mature more, you kind of go through these different worldviews, people start to become more open to religion as they get older with maturity. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out with Gen Z, because a lot of us, I think, do have this upbringing. Whether you have the typical, American conservative Christian upbringing, a lot of those Protestants are looking into Orthodoxy because they want something more. They know that even in their Protestant upbringing, even though there may have been some good things, that it's still hollow. And that's leading them to Orthodoxy. And then people like me, who were secular, became an atheist and just living completely for the world, are seeing that the world is empty, that this can't be it, that there needs to be more, that I'm not seeing virtue in society. Like, society needs to change, the culture needs to change. YouTube should be full of good things. And thank God that YouTube has really changed, and there's a huge focus on self-improvement. There's a huge focus on bettering yourself. And Christianity is becoming more popular online, and thank God for that.
Why do men learn through pain and suffering, and not through pleasure and happiness? Very simply, because pleasure and happiness accustom one to satisfaction with the things given in this world, whereas pain and suffering drive one to seek a more profound happiness beyond the limitations of this world. I am at this moment in some pain, and I call on the name of Jesus, not necessarily to relieve the pain, but that Jesus, in whom alone we may transcend this world, may be with me during it, and his will be done in me. But in pleasure I do not call on him. I am content then with what I have, and I think I need no more. And why is a philosophy of pleasure untenable? because pleasure is impermanent and unreliable, and pain is inevitable. In pain and suffering, Christ speaks to us, and thus God is kind to give them to us, yes, and evil too. For in all of these we glimpse something of what must lie beyond.
It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out for the younger generations. As Gen Z, a lot of us basically we were brought up in this time where the internet was new. It was experimental, and parents didn't really know what to do. But now that we've been through it, I know what I've been through. Got into it. I don't want that for my kids. And it's not that I just want to protect my kids from everything and I don't want them to, know about anything. I'm going to be honest with my children. And I want to create an environment where they actually have structure, where they actually know what good values are. Not just, don't do drugs, but really explaining this in depth and having a relationship with that. That's what a parent should do if they really want their kids to not engage in this. Just give good values, and not in an authoritarian way, but in a way where you actually live it, where you live it with your children. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope there was something you could relate with, no matter what background you're coming from. It'd be interesting to see the future and how Gen Z raises their kids. And I hope more people find Christ, because we need it. The world has always needed Christ, and especially America right now. And we need his teachings. We need to live it. And comment if there's anything you want to share about maybe your experience. If you want me to make more videos like this, God bless.